have low vision or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Kevin Siepel, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 15th issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here is the feature article entitled What the Film Gran Torino Got Right and What America Refused to Learn by B. Vang, who was an actor in the movie. He played the part of Tao in Gran Torino. There was a deep chill in the air the day President Trump said he'd consider invoking the Insurrection Act after a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent fatally shot Renee Good in South Minneapolis. Something came to mind. Inhumanity follows atrocities as the jackal follows the wounded beast. That dictum feels newly relevant among the popular refrain from Trump's critics that the cruelty is the point. I grew up in North Minneapolis in a neighborhood abutting Olson Memorial Highway, the main road that came to define this working-class, mostly non-white part of the city. Many among American families, including my own, have called the area home for decades. The Twin Cities have become almost interchangeable with among America. Things were different for us here. This seemingly provincial Midwestern metro area was a beacon of cosmopolitanism. Indeed, Olson Memorial Highway wasn't merely a road or a geographic marker, it was a symbolic one. Here, different corners of the world converged, along with their histories, peoples, and cultures, leading toward a multiculturalism in the Midwest that the rest of the country might have aspired to. For screenwriter and Minneapolis native Nick Schenk, this Twin Cities became the backdrop for his script Gran Torino, later turned into a $270 million box office hit, helmed by Clint Eastwood, in which I co-starred as a young Hmong American. Though the Twin Cities originally inspired Schenk's writing, the film was ultimately set in Detroit. Released in 2008, just a month after Barack Obama was first elected president, Gran Torino was widely hailed as a post-race Obama-era film. Critics and audiences alike touted it as a story of America's long-awaited multicultural reconciliation. How better to convey this new era than through Eastwood's portrayal of white racist curmudgeon Walt Kowalski, a man resentful about his changing neighborhood and ultimately redeemed through his friendship with Hmong American neighbors. In many ways, my siblings and I, along with our cousins, were the children of the Twin Cities Schenk imagined with zealous enforcement. We were neither the disciplined, austere youths of cinematic stereotypes, nor victims of the street violence that surrounded us. Whether we belonged or not, Minneapolis was ours, and nothing shook that sense of home. Last year marked the 50th anniversary of the ignominious end of America's military misadventures in Southeast Asia. In the aftermath, thousands arrived to U.S. cities like Minneapolis as political exiles and stateless refugees, with no clear account of America's role in the conflicts or the sputtering crisis that displaced them. Nearly 2 generations now separate us from then. Here in Minnesota, where things were truly different for Hmong Americans, those sacrifices seemed to amount to something, offering an answer to that lingering question, where were we to belong? Then came the afternoon of January 7th, when Good's death and Trump's threat of the Insurrection Act delivered a devastating rebuttal. We were reminded of how tentative our belonging is, our being non-white wherever we go, regardless of immigration or citizenship status. The war once fought in Southeast Asia had found us again on the streets of Minneapolis. The gunshots fired that day on Portland Avenue echoed through the city, just as American bombs dropped on Laos had during the secret war. Every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 9 years. Through this historic cauldron of such prolific violence, we now made our way yet again. We never escaped it. On the other side, for us among Lao, Karen, and Cambodians, the question this time was, where next could we call home, if not here? Obey, comply, and be spared, or imprisoned, or worse, killed. Protest correctly or suffer the consequences. Live fully with the understanding that individual moral agency is everything, or face deportation to a land we never knew. How are we to choose correctly under such conditions? What's left is to reckon with due process, as Alex Preddy, Rene Good, or George Floyd did, meted out to us on the whims of an imperfect, irrational law enforcer. Or like Chung Lee Scott Tao, taken from his home in January, covered in only his boxers and Crocs. When Eastwood's Kowalski ultimately embraces the Hmong American neighbors in Gran Torino, it augurs a change promising that yet unrealized Obama-era vision. What I've learned since this film's release is that the transformation Walt undergoes should be aspired to, not because it is inevitable, but because it is necessary for our collective survival. After all, what is the point of the stories we tell ourselves if we refuse to learn from them or avoid their mistakes? I'll never forget what white viewers confided to me in their responses to Gran Torino, that Walt represented the change that they hoped to see in their own lives and families. They believed that change was inevitable. More than 17 years since the film's release, I hope that belief has not simply hardened into apathy or cowardice as cruelty slinks quietly into place. Now is as good a time as any for the moral clarity they found in the film to pave a way forward, especially here in Minnesota. Today, in the winter cold of the Twin Cities, I drove through the streets where my siblings and I spent our youth. The stores and eateries where we once found refuge, where we were fed, are now abandoned. All that remains are shuttered businesses where those who once demanded to be served our food now insist we never belonged. The U.S. is fighting more than its overseas forever wars. The war we cannot afford to ignore is here, at home, our home. We cannot lose. End of article. Here's an article entitled Real Threat to Arctic Security is Coming from the U.S. by Kieran Mulvaney. President Trump, in the face of domestic and international resistance, appears to have ruled out, at least for now, the use of military force to acquire Greenland. The longer-term consequences of Trump's recklessness for the Arctic are unlikely to be worthy of celebration. If Trump's blustering over Greenland was genuinely meant to improve American security, it has almost certainly failed already. Instead, history may record this as the moment when the starting pistol was fired in the Arctic arms race. Trump's ever-shifting rationales for needing Greenland, such as the bizarre and unfounded assertion that hundreds of Chinese and Russian vessels are swarming around the island, were obviously false and effortlessly swatted aside. But Trump and others in his administration continue to raise dubious concerns about security threats in the Arctic. The new domain of international competition is going to be polar competition, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller asserted. And the U.S. Army declared that the Arctic is an arena for competition, a line of attack in a conflict, and a platform for global power projection. The problem with this worldview is that it is nonsense. Notwithstanding breathless assertions to the contrary, conflict in the Arctic is entirely avoidable and unnecessary. The greater threat to the region is a self-fulfilling assumption that conflict is inevitable. It is undeniably true that the Arctic is transforming due to climate change. The region is warming at 4 times the rate of the rest of the world, and summertime sea ice is declining by more than 12% per decade. It is also true that Russia is increasing militarization and industrialization along its Arctic coast, and that China is investing in icebreakers. But Russia's interests are focused on the northern sea route, the ice-strewn passage to the north of its Arctic coast. And despite Vladimir Putin's stated desire to develop it into a seaway to rival the Suez Canal, the navigational challenges it entails mean it is used primarily for domestic transport and shipping commodities to China. China's own Arctic ambitions merit a few passing mentions in Beijing's most recent 5-year plans, and while the total of 1,781 ships that operated in the Arctic in 2024 is an increase of 500 over 2013, it is hardly significant globally when considering that 1,000 vessels are handled in the port of Singapore daily. Besides, Arctic nations have proven more than equal to the challenges facing their region. In 2018, 6 of them, including the U.S. and Russia, joined China and 3 other countries in signing an agreement to regulate commercial fisheries in a future ice-free Central Arctic Ocean. Russia and Norway reached an accord after 40 years of disagreement over their maritime boundaries in the Barents Sea. Canada and Denmark found a Solomonic solution to their territorial dispute over Hans Island. Which is not to say that there are no tensions. Russia's invasion of Ukraine brought Arctic diplomacy to a grinding halt and promoted long-neutral Sweden and Finland to join NATO. Moscow, in turn, sees that move as confirming its long-standing paranoia about NATO expansion. But no Arctic nation had come close to outwardly threatening another's sovereignty and security until now, and it is Trump who is doing the threatening. Trump's bluster seems to have earned him little. The deal he says he struck with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte looks very much like an agreement that has been in place since 1951. Yet the cost of the president's statements and actions will likely be significant. Far from improving America's Arctic security, Trump has cast the country as the region's most unreliable and hostile neighbor. The Arctic is facing an actual threat to its security after all, and that threat is coming from the United States. End of article. Here's an editorial entitled "Society's Shame. Too many people living on the streets signals a call to action for everybody." Buffalo must face up to its increasing numbers of unhoused residents. Especially during these harsh winter days, it is an urgent task. Too many people are left searching for food and safe places to shelter in the city of good neighbors. Some 900-plus homeless in Erie County, and particularly in the city of Buffalo, are in grave need. The lack of affordable housing, a nationwide epidemic, is its central cause. As reported by the News' Deirdre Williams, homelessness across Buffalo and Erie County is becoming even more visible. Encampments are rising throughout the city, and shelters are strained at capacity. There are several local services whose focus is on the unhoused. They are working diligently to bring food and clothing to those living on the streets and to coax them inside when there is available shelter. It's not enough. There are so many reasons people find themselves without some place to live. Rising rents that can't be paid on low or fixed incomes is one example. Evictions and a shortage of affordable units play a huge role. And then there are long-running root causes such as mental illness, substance use, domestic violence, and job loss. Last summer, the Homeless Alliance of Western New York estimated there were some 922 people experiencing homelessness countywide, most of them within Buffalo city limits, an increase of roughly 10% from the year before. Kexen Ma, executive director of the Homeless Alliance of Western New York, said what is being seen isn't a sudden spike, but a slow, steady rise. A main stumbling block, as Ma explained, is that finding a landlord willing to rent, even with demonstrated income or a housing voucher, has become increasingly difficult. There ought to be a law. There is. The City of Buffalo prohibits housing discrimination based on source of income, including Section 8 vouchers, Social Security, and other public assistance. In spite of this, residents are on the streets, struggling to find housing. Shelters are frequently at or near capacity, and emergency placements in motels or hotels are not always available. As a result, Ma said, more people are left to improvise, which means cycling through temporary arrangements or drifting between encampments, even as winter weather becomes more severe and more dangerous. About 770,000 people in the United States experienced homelessness on a single night in January 2024, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's annual point-in-time count, the highest number on record, an increase of roughly 18% from the year before. These soaring national numbers are unsurprising given what's happening at the federal level. Critics warn against the Trump administration's negative outlook on housing first policies, an evidence-based approach to ending homelessness that prioritizes providing immediate, permanent housing without preconditions like sobriety or employment. Deep cuts to long-term housing and shifts toward transitional housing that requires work and addiction treatment could put as many as 170,000 people back on the streets. Buffalo Mayor Sean Ryan said his team has already reached out to organizations that work directly with people experiencing homelessness, including the Homeless Alliance of Western New York and Family Promise of Western New York. Ryan, who took office in January, said he plans to convene a stakeholders meeting to better understand what has changed and how the city should respond. Ryan is focusing on prevention. Part of the City of Good Neighbors housing plan, funded by New York State, aims to expand the supply of affordable housing and keep people from losing housing. The plan includes a rental arrears program designed to help people stay housed after short-term disruptions such as job loss or illness. Imagine living on the streets right now, struggling to survive Arctic winter temperatures. The blazing hot summer sun presents its own problems. Buffalo's unhoused are everybody's business, and this nationwide shame demands more from all of our elected leaders, including the one sitting warm and comfortable in the Oval Office. End of editorial. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here's an article from My View entitled An Honor to Have Grandma's Hands by Maria Scrivani. I have my grandma's hands. I don't know how that happened or when. I don't really recall my mother's hands, which were always immersed in a household task, bathing a baby, loading the washing machine, stirring the sauce bubbling on the kitchen stove. She was a loving and always busy parent. Grandma Rose was more available to my inquiring self, and my interest in looking at her soft, wrinkled hands. She, too, always kept those hands moving in different ways. I was fascinated to see her crocheting antimacassars, those small protective coverings to minimize wear on the backs and arms of sofas and chairs. Their intricate, lacy beauty reminded me of spider webs, lovely and deceptively strong. Grandma was an artist, unschooled and unheralded. She would draw on scraps of paper. Depression era and war survivors wasted nothing. I would watch her drawing on the backs of envelopes, detailed flower sketches for her own and our amusement. Pansies were a favorite. I think of her when I see flats of those flowers for sale, like so many little smiling faces. Cookie baking was another task undertaken by Grandma's hands. She would score a simple dough with an embossed rolling pin, or more often roll the dough out in her hands, fat, pale snakes that she would cut into pieces for baking. As a kid, I was mesmerized. When done, a frosting of confectioner's sugar moistened with orange juice or maybe milk, whatever she had on hand, was the decoration of choice. They were the best cookies, plain, barely sweet biscuits, really, excellent for dunking into a cup of milky coffee. Grandma's hands were often wrapped around rosary beads. Prayer was a regular feature of her life, as it is mine today, though I would call it a meditation practice, and I am pretty sure Grandma would have had no issue with that. Grandma had plenty of reason to take solace there in ritual prayer with its soothing repetitions. She had a hard life, in cold observation, lost a toddler to pneumonia, and another son at age 19 fighting in World War II. She outlived her husband and 3 more sons and dressed in mourning black for the rest of her life. 3 daughters buried her when she died in her late 70s, an age that seemed ancient to me back then. Grandma's little apartment on Buffalo's west side was a temple to her Italian Catholic upbringing. Paintings of Jesus and saints in lurid detail abounded. I was particularly enthralled by a rendering of the Sacred Heart in admirable anatomic detail. And though it may sound creepy to grow up in a place like that, it was Grandma's house, and I always felt perfectly safe, curiosity piqued, and engaged. Grandma indulged us whenever we visited with those cookies in the pink pressed glass jar that sat on her dresser. Cookies in the bedroom? Gram had her own rules. Ice cream sandwiches in the icebox, that's what she called it, even though she had a modern refrigerator. There was also pastina, fried potatoes, beef cutlets, and vegetable soup. We ate well, thanks to the work of Grandma's hands. Now, a septuagenarian and grandmother myself, I look at my hands and wonder. They look like Grandma's hands. Can they do all she did with hers? I would be proud if that were so. End of article. Here's a brief article in the Another Voice section regarding pollution, entitled Seneca Meadows is Exporting Toxic Waste. And it's by Yvonne Taylor, who is vice president and co-founder of Seneca Lake Guardian. Not every community has a landfill, yet many still suffer from their residual effects, including Buffalo. In fact, millions of gallons of toxic liquid waste are being sent to Buffalo every year. In 2024, more than 24 million gallons of leachate, the toxic liquid created when rainwater flows through garbage, was sent to the Bird Island wastewater treatment plant from Seneca Meadows, New York's largest landfill. Last year, it sent more leachate to Bird Island than any other facility in the state. Why does this matter? Leachate contains two PFAs known as forever chemicals, which are linked to cancer, liver disease, and fertility problems. Unfortunately, facilities like Bird Island are not required, and often not equipped, to remove PFAs. So when leachate is accepted, treated, and discharged, those contaminants are not destroyed. Living in Seneca Meadows' shadow, we see how the landfill threatens the Finger Lakes air and water every day. A recent survey shows that among households within 10 miles of the landfill, 26% reported someone diagnosed with cancer or heart disease, and 27% reported asthma or other respiratory issues. In Buffalo, Seneca Meadows' impacts are less obvious, but its effects are insidious. The landfill pays the Buffalo Sewer Authority in exchange for receiving the landfill's waste. And while they're piloting a project to pre-treat up to 50,000 gallons of leachate per day, it's a drop in the bucket compared with the 150 million to 200 million gallons of liquid garbage that flow through Bird Island daily. It's tragic to see a public authority consent to dumping forever chemicals into western New York's water for money. Seneca Meadows continues to operate with an expired permit, while the Department of Environmental Conservation reviews the landfill's proposal to expand and extend its lifespan through 2040. If approved, this would likely create more leachate destined for Buffalo. We call on our elected officials to fix the leachate loophole, stop exporting toxic waste to communities unequipped to handle it, and close the Seneca Meadows landfill once and for all. All New Yorkers deserve clean water, and we deserve better than to be treated as a dumping ground. End of article. Here is here is an opinion piece entitled "Murderer's Rapist Narrative is False," based on DHS data, by Susan Estrich. Remember back in the campaign when immigration meant deporting the rapists and murderers and gang members who were supposedly flooding across the border and wreaking havoc in our cities? That's what mass deportation meant, not mass deportation of gardeners and day laborers from Home Depot. The latest statistics from the Department of Homeland Security, first obtained by CBS News, put the lie to the campaign rhetoric. The headline is that fewer than 14% of the nearly 400,000 immigrants arrested by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement during President Trump's first year in office had either charges or convictions for violent criminal offenses. Rapists and murderers, less than 2% of those arrested by ICE over the past year, had homicide or sexual assault charges or convictions. Some 7,500, or 1.9%, of the ICE arrests involved individuals accused of belonging to gangs like Tren de Aragua, a criminal organization with origins in Venezuela's prisons. Remember when the president and ICE deported more than 200 men accused of being Tren de Aragua members to the notorious prison in El Salvador? A CBS News and 60 Minutes investigation later found that most of the men did not have a criminal record. The 1.9%, make it 2%, is DHS's own statistic. That's it. Total of 4% rapists, murderers, and gang members. For that, we are tearing this country apart, endangering fundamental civil rights and civil liberties, putting young soldiers in impossible positions, and tearing families apart. For what? And at what cost? Among the things that Democrats are insisting on in exchange for their votes to fund DHS are tighter rules around the use of warrants, independent investigations of alleged misconduct, a ban on agents wearing masks, and a mandate for them to wear body cameras. Secretary Kristi Noem has said that, effective immediately, DHS would deploy body cameras to every officer in the field in Minneapolis and would expand the body cam program broadly as funding is available. That comes after their initial budget proposal was to gut the body cam program, with reports that they planned to cut the staff of ICE's body cam program from 22 to 3 and reduce spending on the initiative from about $20.5 million to $5.5 million. In fact, according to congressional testimony from ICE, only 3,000 of ICE's 13,000 officers in the field are assigned to wear body cameras. Another 6,000 cameras are in the process of being deployed. Roughly half of the 20,000 Border Patrol agents now in the field have cameras, and that number is going to grow, Congress was told. In cities like Los Angeles and Chicago, local police are under orders to turn on their body cams when they confront federal immigration efforts. According to an executive directive issued by Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass on Tuesday, Los Angeles police officers must turn on their body cameras at the scene of federal immigration enforcement operations and preserve the footage. In addition to recording the federal immigration agents' actions, LAPD officers must document the name and badge number of the agent's on-scene supervisor, summon emergency personnel if someone at a scene is injured, and take reports from the public about federal agents' alleged misconduct. The directive from Bass also prohibits federal immigration agents from using city property and imposes a fee on owners who allow federal agents to use private property. The idea that LAPD, long criticized for its own record on civil rights and civil liberties, is now going to protect us against federal encroachment of those rights has some longtime critics of the LAPD shaking their heads. But with the feds clearly out of control, it may be the best we can do. End of article. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here is another opinion piece entitled, "Insecurity in the Job Market These Days is Painfully Real for Many," by Froma Harrop. Groundhog Day's furry forecaster, Punxsutawney Phil, predicted 6 more weeks of wintry weather. What if we asked Phil to apply his insights to the frigid job market? He might answer the way an alarmed groundhog does, with chattering teeth, and then squeak, "Whee, whee." Cold days are coming for American job seekers, and they'll last a lot longer than 6 weeks. Economists are using the term deep freeze to describe the current job outlook. These are strange times. The official unemployment rate of 4.45% is not a distressing number, but the reasons behind it are worrisome. Many workers are sticking with their jobs, fearful they can't find a new one. Aside from some big headline layoffs, most employers figure business is good enough to hang on to the staff they've got, but not strong enough to take new people on. The main reason? They have no idea what exactly is going on in the American economy. Is it fair to pin this unsettling situation on President Trump? Sure, it's fair, though he doesn't deserve all the blame. What he does reliably is make a lot of problems worse. Start with the tariffs. His trade war, slapping higher duties on essentially the rest of the world, was sold as a job creation engine. It hasn't worked out that way. Since, quote, unquote, Liberation Day, April 2nd, U.S. factory employment has fallen month after month, and last year the number of job openings dropped by nearly 1 million. What tariffs have done is push up prices that Americans pay for food and other everyday goods. They add to inflation. Prices haven't spiked as dramatically as some warned, but they've risen enough to leave consumers uneasy and on edge. American companies that obtain parts and materials from abroad are now paying more for them. Some have swallowed at least some of those added costs, but much of the tariff tax gets passed onto buyers. Many companies say they will now have to pass more of those costs to consumers. Such disruptions have hit Main Street businesses especially hard. They are less able than big corporations to deal with the confusion over tariffs. Who is meant to foot the bill? Vendors? Purchasers? Shoppers? Small companies employ almost half the American workforce. Then there's the immigration crisis. Roundups of undocumented aliens were supposed to free up jobs for Americans, but Trump's spectacle of ICE agents sweeping up the foreign-born has created a mess for local businesses. Both legal and illegal immigrants are afraid to go to work and shop at stores. Immigrants, after all, are also customers. Artificial intelligence isn't Trump's doing, but it's here. Analysts expect American companies to pour more money into robotics and AI, technologies that replace human labor. A bachelor's degree will no longer shield many college grads from unemployment, as AI moves in on work many well-paid professionals considered safe. Anthropic's AI consultant, Claude, can now read, write, and analyze text. It can take on some accounting tasks, such as reviewing documents and drafting reports. As demand for humans with such skills shrinks, employers looking to add staff have become super picky. That's making life especially tough for young people trying to land entry-level jobs. The office outlook is scary. A small cadre of senior executives, the C-suite, presiding over rooms of smart machines that can match or even outthink Homo sapiens. Businesses don't know which way is up, down, or sideways, and Trump's daily dose of chaos isn't helping. The mystery of what will come next leaves many companies hesitant to hire. Winter is settling in the job market. If you're feeling insecure, you may be on to something. End of article. Here are the letters from everybody's column, letters from our readers. The first letter is entitled, Langworthy is Failing Those He Represents. We, the people of the 23rd Congressional District, elected Nick Langworthy to be our advocate and our voice in Congress. Instead, Langworthy is quietly quitting his duties as a member of the House of Representatives. Langworthy has turned his back on his constituents in his recent vote against extending subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. He claimed during his November 2025 teletown hall that only 0.7% of his district depends on these subsidies. The population of the 23rd is approximately 770,000. I guess that is his weird way of saying 5,000 people. The Kaiser Family Foundation puts that number at 9,900. KFF also estimates that premiums for a couple in their 60s making $82,000 a year will see their premiums double from $581 to $1,161. Langworthy would like to sell you on the idea that the ACA subsidies amount to unnecessary spending. He resorts to the rhetorical trick of wordsmithing tiny fractions. He is insulting. He is also off by 50% for 0.5%. Or 0.5%. We are indeed facing a healthcare cliff. Langworthy knows this crisis is happening, and he also knows that it is his job to work toward a plan to help fix this. Instead of a plan, he leads Congress in a hearing of the absurd, politely asking big insurance, "Why must you charge so much?" I wish he were kidding. That is the opposite of representation. That is abandonment. This letter was submitted by Shellen Wright of Derby. Here's a letter from Clifford Miller of East Amherst entitled, Firing McDermott Was a Terrible Decision. We in Buffalo are very appreciative that owner Terry Pegula has kept the Bills here. I believe the best decision he made as owner was in hiring Sean McDermott. Unfortunately, I also believe firing him will prove to be his worst decision. How does taking away the heart and soul of our leadership team move them closer to a Super Bowl victory? Far more likely that it moves them further away. I can't think of another candidate that will be a better fit for Buffalo, do more for the community, improve our players, work harder, or make a more cohesive unit. This is a sad day for this team and puts more pressure on Brandon Beane and the incoming coach. We should rather have continued to trust someone who has built a culture and team to capture that prize. Far more likely, he will do that in another city now. Here is an article, or rather a letter from Stan Martin of Buffalo entitled, Flavored Tobacco Items Need to be Banned. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made it plain in his letter from Birmingham jail, justice too long delayed is justice denied. Those words should haunt the ongoing failure of Buffalo's leadership to ban the sale of flavored tobacco products, including menthol cigarettes. For generations, Big Tobacco has deliberately targeted black communities with menthols, saturating our neighborhoods with ads, price discounts, and addiction, while fully aware of the deadly consequences. Higher rates of cancer, heart disease, and asthma in black communities are not accidental. They are the predictable outcome of corporate exploitation rooted in racism and greed. Dr. King spent his life confronting exactly this kind of injustice. No Menthol Buffalo is carrying forward that legacy by demanding an end to the sale of all flavored tobacco products. This is not about individual choice. It is about stopping an industry that profits by shortening black lives. Ending menthol sales is a matter of racial justice, public health, and human dignity. Yet the City of Buffalo, its Corporation Council, and the Buffalo Common Council continue to delay. More studies, more conversations, more excuses. All while Big Tobacco keeps cashing checks and black families keep burying loved ones. Dr. King warned us about false comfort of gradualism and the harm caused by leaders who value order over justice. Buffalo is living that warning right now. The truth today is simple. Delaying a menthol ban is siding with Big Tobacco. Black lives, we need more courage, not more process. End of letter. Here is a letter by Jeremy Sharkey of Victor, entitled, Fans Must Suffer and Hope. I've been a Bills fan my whole life. I lived, cheered, and teared through 4 straight Super Bowl losses. While those teams never brought home the Lombardi Trophy, they built something that lasted: loyalty, belief, perseverance. They taught us what it means to be a Buffalo Bills fan and gave us the line that still defines this franchise: where else would you rather be than right here, right now? I'm grateful to Terry Pegula for keeping the Bills in Buffalo. He saved this franchise for a city that lives and breathes football. But as a lifelong fan, I'm struggling with the direction we're taking and the price we seem willing to pay to win. I tell my kids that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. Firing Coach McDermott feels emotional, and emotional leadership in tough moments can undermine everything you're trying to build. When leadership suddenly shifts, trust can fracture. I want to thank Coach McDermott. He committed to this city, this team, and the process that brought us back to relevance. He reminded us that there really is no better place to be than right here, right now. Bills Mafia is family. Loyalty and resilience define us. Someday we will lift the Lombardi, and I hope it's with people who contributed to every hard-earned yard on and off the field. Good luck, Coach Brady. You've got a defining year ahead of you. End of letter. Here is a letter from Joseph Riggle of Kenmore entitled, Voters Must Remember Minnesota, in November. President Trump must shake his head in disbelief every time he sees protesters standing up in defense of immigrants and traditional American values, especially those protesting in Minnesota in the dead of winter. He frequently claims that they are paid protesters, and I think that he believes this, as he and his sons would never do anything for anyone else without being compensated. I imagine he views unpaid protesters, as he does Americans who serve in the military, as suckers and losers. Trump and others in his administration continue to admonish the protesters to obey ICE and the Border Patrol agents and not to try to make their job more difficult. But Americans can see with their own eyes that the primary goal of these so-called agents is to intimidate and terrorize not just immigrants, but also American citizens and immigrants in this country legally. They have been instructed to be as vicious as possible in carrying out their mission. We are supposed to stay home in fear for our lives. Fortunately, the people of Minnesota are providing us with a brilliant example of what it means to be a true American. We must stand with them. And we will need to remember and emulate their examples this November, when Trump sees the polls, invents another emergency, and either tries to stop the midterm elections altogether or floods the cities with his agents in an attempt to suppress the voters who oppose him, his policies, and his goons. End of letter. Here is the final letter in everybody's column, entitled "Too Many Stand By as Democracy Dies," and it's submitted by Larry Gustina of Buffalo. In the January 25th New York Times, Maureen Dowd referred to our current president as an anarchic toddler, constantly causing upheaval across the globe. In the first year of his second term as commander-in-chief, he has intentionally caused irreparable and possibly irreversible damage to our fragile democracy and to the world order. How has this happened so quickly? I submit that the guardrails, our expected protections, the norms and rules of law against cheating and illegal activities being committed by our president, elected officials, representative, and insiders have been willfully ignored and trampled upon. Possibly more damaging is the deafening silence, translate complicity, from our Republican congressional representatives, the Supreme Court, too many of our major media outlets, our top business and economic executives, our world-class colleges and universities, the nation's top legal experts, and perhaps we the people. Shamelessly, our elected representatives have chosen to represent themselves rather than the country they took an oath to protect, honor, and defend. History will not look too kindly upon these self-serving citizens. Recent reporting shows our 47th president to have pocketed $1,408,500,000 in this past year, serving himself rather than our country. End of letter. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Moving on to the section of the Buffalo News entitled Next, the next section, the personal finance portion of that section. Keys to Success, 5 Trends in the Car Market, plus Tips for Shopping for a New Ride Right Now, by Josh Jaquo of Edmonds. In recent years, a shortage of vehicles, rising prices, and high borrowing costs made it challenging for some people to purchase a new or used vehicle. Thankfully, the automotive market is shifting in ways that could be beneficial if you're planning to buy a vehicle in the next few months. The auto experts at Edmonds have identified 5 car shopping trends that you can expect to see in 2026 and have advice on how to take advantage of them to get the best deal. Number 1, more holdout shoppers are returning, boosting used car selection. Many consumers delayed buying a new car over the past several years due to high prices, limited selection, and expensive loans. Those deferred purchases resulted in fewer used vehicles being available for sale. But we're seeing that trend diminish in 2026. More people are finally trading in their used vehicles, which is increasing supply and variety in the second-hand market. That growing inventory can work in your favor. With more used vehicles on the market, pricing pressure shifts back toward dealers, especially on mainstream models. Instead of feeling forced to accept the only car on the lot, you can compare multiple examples of the same model across dealerships and use those price differences as leverage. The more time you spend comparing listings, the easier it becomes to spot an overpriced car and negotiate a good deal. Number 2, trade-in values remain unusually strong. One bright spot for owners who have held off on a recent purchase will be equity for their trade-in, says Ivan Drury, Director of Insights at Edmonds. According to Edmunds transaction data, 7-year-old vehicles that were traded in during 2025 were valued at an average of $14,400. That's a 72% increase compared to 2019, when 7-year-old vehicles were appraised at just $8,400. You can use that equity as a negotiating tool. Before visiting a dealership, get multiple trade-in or purchase appraisals from online pricing tools and local dealers. Bringing those numbers with you helps prevent lowball offers and ensures you capture your car's full value. More money for your old car means you'll finance less and have lower monthly payments, which is especially important as prices remain elevated. Number 3, a surge of off-lease EVs is reshaping the used market. Electric vehicle leasing surged in 2023, and those EVs are now entering the used market as their leases come to an end. The result is a big increase in used EVs for sale this year. Many of them will have relatively low miles and significant discounts compared with new EVs. For shoppers curious about EVs but wary of new car prices, this is one of the best entry points in years. You also can look for a certified pre-owned EV if you're concerned about durability. A certified pre-owned vehicle, or CPO, has been thoroughly inspected by the dealership and typically comes with an extended warranty. With more used EVs for sale, pricing is becoming more competitive. Number 4, financing costs are finally easing. High interest rates added thousands of dollars to the cost of buying a car over the last 2 years. As rates begin to decline and automakers compete for buyers in a softer sales environment, loan offers are improving, and incentive-driven financing is making a comeback. More favorable financing means more of your monthly payment goes to paying for the vehicle instead of interest. Be sure to compare all available financing options. Getting pre-approved by a bank or credit union gives you a baseline, and dealers may be willing to beat it with manufacturer-backed promotions. Even a small interest rate reduction can translate into meaningful savings over the life of a loan, making it one of the most critical areas to shop carefully. Number 5, longer loans and changing vehicle content require extra scrutiny. As prices remain high, more buyers are stretching payments across 72 months or even 84-month loans. While a longer loan lowers the monthly bill, it increases the total amount paid and keeps you upside down longer on a loan, which occurs when you owe more on your loan than the vehicle is actually worth. To combat the loan term creep, focus on total cost, not just on the monthly payment. A shorter loan may cost more each month, but will save money overall. It also helps shorten the time you will be upside down on your loan. End of article. Here is a brief article in the real estate section by David Robinson entitled, "Want to Flip a Home? You're in a good place." If you're looking for a fixer-upper house, the Buffalo-Niagara region is a good place to be. With home prices here about a third lower than the national average, it's a little easier to come out ahead for buyers who snap up a home that needs a lot of work, fix it up, and then resell it. In fact, a recent Realtor.com report ranked Buffalo-Niagara as the number 3 market for house flippers, who typically buy at a price that's about 48% less than the median market price, and then relist it for sale after renovations for about 94% of the region's median. That's a potential gain of almost 46%, trailing on the expected returns in Pittsburgh and Cleveland. This is a rather affordable set of markets, which means that flippers have especially low entry points from which they can build homes up, the report said. The Realtor.com researchers looked at homes that were at least 20 years old, that had been purchased within the last 2 years, and then relisted in October for at least 20% more than their purchase price. But flipping homes is getting harder as renovation costs rise and mortgage rates remain above 6%. The typical flipped home nationally sells for a premium of about 36%. The difference in Buffalo Niagara is that it's cheaper to buy dilapidated homes than it is nationally, which helps create a bigger cushion for flippers after accounting for renovation costs, which tend to be about the same across the country, the report said. End of article. Here's an article in the manufacturing section of Next entitled Ford GM Workers to Receive Profit-Sharing Checks. Workers at General Motors and Ford Motor Company, plants represented by the United Auto Workers, will soon receive hefty profit-sharing checks. Under their contracts, the workers receive $1,000 for each $1 billion of their respective employers' annual North American profits. Eligible workers at GM will receive profit-sharing payments of up to $10,500, while eligible workers at Ford will receive up to $6,780. The amount the workers receive varies depending on their compensated hours for the year. About 47,000 GM workers are eligible for profit-sharing checks. Locally, GM operates a components plant in Lockport and an engine plant in the town of Tonawanda. The profit-sharing amount at GM is down 28% from a record high $14,500 the previous year. The payments will be made February 27th. About 800 workers at GM's Tonawanda plant, represented by UAW Local 774, are eligible for profit-sharing checks. UAW 774 members earned this, said Teddy Maldonado, the local's president, in an online post. These profits don't happen without the work done on our floor. The number of workers eligible at GM's Lockport plant could not be obtained. GM says the plant has a total of 1,500 workers, but the automaker would not specify how many of them are hourly employees. At Ford, the profit-sharing checks were down 34% from $10,208 last year. About 650 workers at the company's Hamburg stamping plant are eligible for the checks, according to UAW Local 897. End of article. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 15th issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News. We read from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News every Sunday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Kevin Siepel. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the National Enquirer. At 8 p.m., we have People Magazine. And at 9 o'clock, we have the New York Times Book Review. Stay tuned for these readings and more. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, please stay with us. If you're listening to this publication online, you're probably using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Zero, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-5555, extension 5. Thank you. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print